And we are recording. Thank you all for joining La Raza Historical Society, the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley, and San Jose Women's Club, along with Marisa Gaska. And we would like to thank the Santa Clara County Office of Women's Policy, Division of Equity and Social Justice, for graciously funding this beautiful platica today. We have local artists in the room, educators, activists, very beautiful, vibrant group of people. And I'm excited to see your faces here on screen. And it looks like we're pretty much set. So, technology sometimes is my best friend in this moment. It's going slow and low. So I guess we're bringing in that low rider perspective into the mix. Thank you all for joining us today. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already done so. We are recording and streaming live. There will be a restream, and clearly you registered through Eventbrite. All the attendees will receive a follow-up email with all kinds of goodies, including a link to the restream, a link to some fun little downloads that will extend this work beyond this moment, and hopefully ways for us to continue movement outside of this space. And with that said, let's cross our fingers, folks, and see if we can get the stream to go live officially. And I'll be happy to move this conversation along, because we've been waiting patiently to officially get started. But just like a live event, right? Sometimes you got to stand there in awkwardness and play the music for a little bit longer and get settled in and greet everybody and really just create that space of confianza and community and family. And I really do aim to keep us as close as possible as we can. Those pieces we can recreate virtually, right? It's an interesting time in our present, and we're having to use all of these high-tech Aztec tools and bring ourselves into these spaces to connect. And so thank you so much. Feel free to let me know if you're experiencing any issues in terms of access, or if you're noticing that audio is glitching out. Let us know so that we can address it and bring us all into the conversation. All right, folks, it's looking like all the switches are already systems go, and I am happy to share with you these beautiful mujeres, fierce mujeres, who, quite frankly, I selfishly wanted to spend time with, but also generously wanted to share this conversation with you, and their perspectives that oftentimes have served like its own form of remedio for a lot of us in our own struggles on the daily in doing heart space work. And so you'll notice that the name of the event today is Suffrage, Sufrimiento y Corazón, a Chicana tea talk on our legacy of suffrage and local activism. And the naming is intentional. We are commemorating 100 years of women's rights to vote, but at the same time acknowledging that our history of suffrage as Latinas and as Chicanas in particular is complicated and messy, and not as clearly linear cut as that mainstream history and that narrative. So thank you, Blanca, Elisa, Christina, Dulce, and Laura, for being here with us today and sharing a little bit about your perspectives as people in the world that are centered in who you are and that serve as an example for our community. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen in the background, but I did want to acknowledge collaborators once again. You are being hosted by La Raza Historical Society in collaboration with the Latina Coalition, San Jose Women's Club, as part of this bigger T series. For this particular platica, we have Chicana and Chicano studies from San Jose State University. And we will invite the collaborators to share some words at some point in the program. But right now, I really want to turn it over to our panelists who have been graciously waiting to get this platica started. And we had a great time hanging out for a while before this. And I know that this talk is going to be beautiful and more beautiful than I can envision. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to see the range of faces in this, what I call mitote in a good way, right? That mitote in terms of gathering and kind of a ceremony of sorts. And we asked you all to bring your tea, your tecito, tus medicinas. I have my yerba buena tea right here. It reminds me of my abuelita. And I have my hummingbird hat off to the side that brings in the spirit of my grandmother. And I see so many beautiful, familiar faces in the Zoom room. And so before I hand it off to the panelists, I'm so sorry, mujeres, we have to do the logistical orders of business. And the logistical pieces of business require me to remind you that the event is being recorded. We are very much present in this moment in this Zoom room. We encourage you to participate in the chat. I will go ahead and mute people accordingly because we want to make sure we can hear our panelists. I'll be muting myself quite a bit. It is being streamed live on Facebook. We are hoping to be able to offer the restream and the link to that so that you can share it with your networks, with your familias, with our babies. They need to hear these stories too. If you need to take a quick stretch break, get down, do the thing. We're not going to force you to keep your camera on. It is nice when you're able to see reactions from people on screen. So we do appreciate you doing that if you can and feel comfortable doing so. Teamwork makes the dream work. Technical help is available in the chat if needed. There are a few of us here in the background trying to make sure we're all accessing this platica. And again, just reminding ourselves to stay on mute when the panelists especially are speaking. Oftentimes when we gather women of color in particular, folks sometimes forget and get very excited by what we have to share and want to engage in dialogue, which is fine. And that's where we have the power of the chat. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A and possibly breakout rooms. But for now, we want to make sure that we can hear the stories that we gathered here to share space with. And before we move along in the program, also acknowledging that a lot of us are, or all of us really, are on Indigenous land, that this land is very much inhabited by our Indigenous communities who continue to be in existence alongside us. And so we legacy and we speak truth to power in solidarity in the land struggles that are currently underway and that we can ourselves become more informed about as we move along, not just in the program, but generally speaking. So without further ado, finally, les digo, no se me acaba el mitote, but finally we get to our panelists. And we have a few questions to guide the conversation. And I will be introducing them briefly by way of their bios, and we'll just go in the order of the scroll here on my screen that you all hopefully can't see. And my first question to the panelists themselves, after I offer up each of their introductions, is who are you and who do you carry, both in your lives and in your legacy of suffrage? And I'll start off as we move along in the biographies here. And not to be calling on you, Señora Blanca, con mucho respeto, but I do want to share a little bit about your biography, which, you know, your name speaks for itself. You're an American social activist and former politician, the first Latina elected to San Jose City Council and the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, first Latina to serve as the board's chairperson. So many beautiful, compelling things. And for the sake of finally shutting my mouth and letting the panelists feature theirs, I'm going to also copy and paste into the chat their full bios, and you can find those on the event page as well after the event if you'd like to go back and take a look and spread that knowledge and awareness. So Blanca, I invite you. Who do you carry? Who are you? In your own words. And I invite you to unmute yourself as well, because I think at this point I have everyone except for myself muted.
Rosanna, en primer lugar, gracias por lo que haces. I'm so proud of you for putting this seminar, webinar, this gathering, this platica together. And one of the things that I will say almost immediately that I am so proud to know that La Raza Historical Society, the Latina Coalition, and the Office of Women's Policy are a co-sponsor, because I can take credit gladly for having been a founder of those organizations. When the La Raza Historical Society was formed, I was the first president. And when the Office of Women's Policy was formed, I was a member of the Board of Supervisors. And way back, and it was many, many years ago in the 70s and the 80s, I was one of the founders of the Chicana coalition. Mm-hmm. So what do I carry? I carry a lifetime of activism. I think from the moment that I was born in Colorado, I was inspired by my parents. I was inspired by the little mining town that I was born in, which was a multiracial setting comprised of coal miners like my dad, who came from diverse parts of the world to work in this mining town known as Cokedale. I mention that because, in fact, it gave me, in that little village, an understanding of people who come from all parts of the world, immigrants, to work, to support families, and to establish communities. We had people from Poland, we had people from Russia, we had people from Italy, there were people from Ireland. In fact, it was racial and multi-ethnic. And so I grew up in an atmosphere that was very inclusive and that had no difference. We were all so much alike. Our parents all worked in the same place. We lived in the same company housing. We went to the same school, to the same church. There was a similarity amongst all of us that I think was the foundation for me having grown up to be the inclusive, all-encompassing person for people from all over the world. It was my foundation. My father was a coal miner, but he was very much, with very little education, was very well informed. And you have to understand that for me, growing up in Cokedale was my foundational piece where I learned to be aware of politics as a daily presence in life. In Cokedale, in northern New Mexico, it was not uncommon to see Latinos either holding elected office or pursuing elected office. It was not uncommon at all to see Vigil for assessor, or Sanchez for something, or Martinez or Chavez. It was very commonplace to see those names out there as leaders in the community. So between my father, who was a great admirer of John L. Lewis as the president of the Coal Miners Union, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who took us out of the Depression, it was not at all uncommon to be influenced by my surroundings. I do believe that by the time we moved to California in 1947, knowing as much as I know today, the spark of activism was created from the time I was born through the actions of my family and through the actions of my neighbors, and continued when I came to California. But it's very difficult to talk about a lifetime of work. I lived a long life, and up until 10 years ago, I was an elected official serving not only on the San Jose City Council, but on the Board of Supervisors. And I will tell you, first and foremost, that the most important message to be conveyed in what I carry with me today and what I have carried all my life is that it's important to be part of a movement. Everything that happens in life that is directed at a generational effort to improve conditions for that generation turns out to be the building block for future generations to come. The work that I did in the 40s and the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s were all building blocks for what we have in our communities today. And so what I carry is a lifetime of work, a lifetime of progress, a lifetime of being involved in movements with other people, and knowing that our work, while faced many obstacles, was participated in with a resolve and with an undaunted attitude that the work had to be done by us, because nobody else, even those who were our foes, if you want to use that word, but even those who did not consider us of value or did not believe or did not act as if we were entitled to the same rights for equality as everybody else. We needed to pursue that avenue and to exemplify that hard work, sacrifice, belief in the Constitution, belief in ourselves, belief in our own goodness was worth fighting and struggling for. That is what I have carried all of my life. I continue to do that today. And I am so, so, so excited that in today's world, despite the multitude of challenges and issues that are sometimes overwhelming, there are people doing good works and to continue to bring this country forward to a place of equality and equal justice for all. So I don't know. I would just say one final thing, Rosanna, because it's very relevant to the issue of the women's suffrage movement. You know, it took 40 years for the suffragists to get the right to vote. But in my lifetime, I was surrounded with women of such prominence and such warriorness about them. They were fierce. Women like B. Robinson, the woman who formed the first women's shelter for battered women. I was involved with Ernestina Garcia, who was just ferocious in her advocacy against police brutality. I was involved with, everybody remembers Sofia Mendoza, of course, and Esther Medina, the woman who led the MAXA, and just wonderful, wonderful women. Ermelinda Sapien, who to this day continues to be an exemplary CEO of a job training institution that is OIC. Well, we called it OIC then. It is now called CET, I believe. But my generation was fortunate enough to have been in the throes of this exciting movement headed by Cesar Chavez and the Corsillo movement at the Catholic Church and the Chicano Employment Committee. There are just so many organizations that I was a part of, and that to this day, we reflect on those days of togetherness, of mobility, of cooperation and collaboration, all striving to improve conditions, mainly for Latino families. And today, still fighting for equity and a society that embraces all of us, regardless of where we come from. But my life has been one of dedication to community, but it has always been in the embrace of other organizations and other do-gooders like all of us are.
Thank you so much for those fierce words, Senora Blanca. Definitely resonates on so many levels. And I'm telling y'all, this panel is fire. Fierce chingonas in their own right, truly, guerreras for sure, who are reflections of other women they've held alongside them in this same struggle. And so next up, I would like to invite Maestra Laura Castro, to also share a little bit about your story and who you are and who you carry with you in that good way. And again, in the interest of time, because your words are going to be better than what's in the bio, I'm pasting the bio there for you in the chat, folks, if you would like to just read a quick little snippet. But as you can see, these women speak fiercely for themselves, about themselves, and will tell you who they are. So Laura.
Gracias. Gracias, Rosanna, for, first of all, for the opportunity to be here and share my life story. But my life story isn't just me, myself, ¿verdad? It's so many more. I carry with me, first of all, my ancestors, my Chichimeca, my Cochimí family, ¿verdad? Those that came before me, and I'm very thankful for that. And also, I carry those teachings of my father, my mother, ¿verdad? Taught us how to fight and how to work hard, ¿verdad? I grew up in San Jose. I was born and raised in San Jose. I lived on Stevens Lane, right off of White Road. We picked the prunes and the walnuts there, and there were 8 children, ¿verdad? And we all worked very hard. Summers was dedicated to work, ¿verdad? And I went to Evergreen School, right there, the first Evergreen, the old one that's on Fowler Road. And then I went to Silver Creek High School. But my family, we were campesinos, you know, we worked in the fields. And there was no child labor laws back then, so we all worked very hard, you know, all the time in the fields. And climbing ladders to pick cherries and, you know, pulling them around. You know, I think I was I can remember that I was like 8 years old with me and my brother and I pulling a ladder and picking it up and putting it against a cherry tree. You know, we did that kind of work because that was the kind of work that our familias did back then in San Jose. And my first time I ever really went to a Chicano studies class was in Silver Creek High School. George Shirakawa was my teacher back then. My history teacher is where I met my husband. And I think that class opened my eyes to a lot of injustice. He would take us to the courthouses, and he would take us, you know, to different outings, you know, the class outings and stuff. And he really, really supported me to go to college. But that didn't happen you know, right after high school. It didn't happen. Instead, I started having my children. And through that, my children and my husband and I, his name is Robert Castro, by the way, a lot of people might know him. We did a lot of movement things. First of all, with the Native American movement, back in the early 80s, we went to DQU and we fought and did marchas for DQU to stay open, which is a Native American Chicano university, which is closed now, pero, you know, back then it was important for us to keep that colegio open, that university open for those studies that were being done then. We marched from DQU to, which is over by Davis, to Sacramento, ¿verdad? We did several marches. And again, I want to emphasize that it wasn't me by myself, it was my family, my children, my husband. We were all involved in the Chicano movement. And in the I want to say that I'm a Chicana, but because I believe in the word Chicana, meaning that person that struggles and fights for their gente. That's what a Chicana, a true Chicano is. It's not just a word that I throw around. You know, I can call myself a Mexican American, but that's not what I feel I am. I feel I'm a Chicana. Chicana by earning that. You know, we all earned being called Chicana. And along with that, I just want to say that my family, and I'm not saying just myself, because I became a danzante 1987, you know, and I've been dancing for 33 years now. And with being a danzante has gotten me into a lot of, not trouble, but a lot of places, ¿verdad? I've danced in prisons my children and I danced in prisons, danced in universities, danced in, and as far going into Washington D.C., you know, going to the reservations, Pine Ridge Reservation. We went to the Zuni Reservation. We've been to the Nevada reservations. We've been to a lot of places, and this is a movement life, ¿verdad? To bring light to the Chicano movement also, because I'm more than just a danzante. I care about my comunidad, you know, and so wherever the danza takes me is a community thing, ¿verdad? We've done boycotts. We've done the boycott of grapes, ¿verdad? We've done the boycott of the lettuce. We protested for mujeres, those mujeres that died in that have continued dying in Juarez and El Paso. We did protests in front of the Concilio Mexicano for those 43 students that disappeared in Mexico. We've done protests for Black Lives Matter, ¿verdad? For Chicano Lives Matter, ¿verdad? Back in the 80s, early 80s, when there was police brutality on Story and King, ¿verdad? And I know I'm jumping around from dates from history, but it's really hard for me to just go in a sequential order. But those are the things that my family has done and I have done. And it's important for us to teach our children about our history and get them involved, ¿verdad? Many of you know my daughters, Angelina Castro and Yolanda Castro. They have different last names now, Lopez and Flores. And Eva Castro, who also works for a nonprofit, doing a lot of the same work that a lot of you do, ¿verdad? To me, having integrity in our work is the most important thing, ¿verdad? We have to bring up all our mujeres at the same time. Bring them up and hold them up, ¿verdad? And I always tell the men, we don't walk in front of you, we don't walk behind you, we walk right alongside of you, because we are that backbone of the movement. And, you know, I just want to say that I'm very proud of my husband for all the work that he has done, you know, as far as, you know, making the Chicano movement part of his life, ¿verdad? And I want to thank you, Rosanna, again, you know, because this is an important issue, you know, important for all of us, ¿verdad? Especially what all the grassroots people are doing, ¿verdad? We don't do things for the pat on the back. We don't do things for people to know us. We do things so that other people who don't have that voice, have somebody to speak for them, ¿verdad? And for our children, ¿verdad? The children who are having issues right now getting onto this virtual learning, those people in migrant camps, those people out in wherever they don't have internet services, those are the people that we fight for. You know, it's important for us to speak for them and be on those front lines for them, ¿verdad? You know, I often say, you know, I was born here, so I have a little bit of privilege over people that were born in Mexico and that come here looking for a better life, ¿verdad? And so that's why we do these things, for those people, for our gente, you know, our raza, our sangre. And so, you know, it was just a little bit about what we do and who we are. And just wanted to thank all of you, and not to forget those children who are locked up, you know, over at the border, you know, who are held in cages. And, you know, just gracias por la oportunidad de decir estas cosas. You know, thank you for this opportunity to speak a little bit, and I don't want to take up too much time. But I just wanted to say it's not about me. It's about all of us working together. Gracias, Tío Mateo.
Gracias, Laura. Always powerful words coming from all of the mujeres on this panel, and you know, speaking truth to power and really acknowledging the collective voice that we all carry as mirrors, windows, doors, familia, comunidad, there's definitely that sense of responsibility toward each other that I think a lot of folks could benefit from, if they listen, right? For those of who are constantly having to help amplify issues, y'all are medicine for me in this space and outside of this space, and definitely remind me to keep on, because it's not just about me, like you said, Laura. It's not just about, you know, Blanca's political trajectory, but that we're showing up for very compelling reasons that have nothing to do with us as individuals or ego, but definitely with so much heart and ferocity. And so y'all are going to take the time you need to just say what needs to be heard in this space. And I thank you very much. And at this time, I want to invite La Señora Elisa Marina Alvarado to also share some perspective and some story by way of that same question, right? Which can take us in so many different directions in terms of who we are collectively, but who you are and who you carry with you in your life, in your legacy of struggle and suffrage. And so far, we're hearing from the panelists that our legacy of suffrage isn't quite linear. Our timelines are different. Our timelines run parallel to what we're seeing on a calendar, but our stories are braided together in a different way and require us to circle back. And so I value the intergenerational perspectives being offered here. Thank you to Blanca and Laura. And up next, we have Elisa Marina Alvarado. If you could unmute yourself and share some words. I've gone ahead and put your bio, which phenomenal as well, list of accomplishments. But I suspect that your words are just going to add layers that can't be captured in the black and white as powerfully as they can through your own voice.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I also want to thank the La Raza Historical Society and the Latina Coalition, the Office of Women's Affairs, and my suegra here. I'm very, very blessed to be, sitting next to her and talking about, this legacy, these journeys as Chicanas. She's been, long before, I became part of the family, she had a huge influence on me. I think one of the first political campaigns that I did a little bit of walking for was, was for her, a candidacy. And I remember feeling guilty going into Anita, what was her name? Anita Duarte's market down on South First Street, because she was running against her. But I was really, thinking about, the suffrage and it's very, I couldn't help but think about remembering my mother grieving when Kennedy was assassinated, just how deeply pained, she was at the loss, and that leader, had held so much hope for, I think, a lot of Chicanos, Mexican Americans. And my father also grieved his death, his assassination. But, I was thinking of where the origins of my place in community, the origins of my place, as part of this, this comunidad activista. And I remember my grandmother telling me, my grandmother Marina, that the stories, she'd tell a lot of stories about her father, Purepecha, Sintzunzan, Michoacan, and how he took the whole family up to live in caves during the Mexican Revolution because he did not trust either the federales or the Zapatistas, the revolutionaries. And she, in other ways too, she would talk about how he, rejected wearing clothing that was, European, but only wear manta. And so I got this sense of don't trust, that we're Indian people and don't trust anybody that's not Indian, and So I kind of brought that with me along as I was then looking at my parents, you know, the hope that they held for good, you know, good changes to come about because, you know, because of the Kennedys. And I was fortunate. My father was brought by, when he was about 7 or 8, brought to the U.S. from Mexico. And my grandmother, I mean, they're very, very, you know, poor origins. She was a victim of domestic violence. And also my father was beaten and treated, you know, very, very badly by his father. And she became a single mom of 2 boys. She worked in garment factories. And eventually, you know, my father just saw that studying was a way for him to, you know, levantar la familia, you know, lift the family. And so he did really well in high school. He went into the Navy. He and his brother, they were interesting because my tío was the pachuco. My tío was the, you know, the bad boy, and my father was the good boy, you know, getting good grades and all this. And so also kind of from my tío, I got this sense of don't trust, you know, it's like, don't assimilate. And, you know, he would kind of tease my dad and about trying to make it. My dad, was because of being in the military, that they gave him a scholarship that allowed him to go to the university. So I had, you know, these kinds of experiences of like, do we stand outside, you know, of society, or do we try to, you know, get in there and get ahead? But it was really through the Chicano movement I saw, no, with the concept of self-determination. You know, we make our own way. We decide what is success and a good life and progreso and all of that. You know, that is it's for us to come up with the criteria for what that looks like. I was very much influenced by, we lived in Mexico we lived in Peru for a year, and I saw the treatment of indigenous people there, terrible, terrible treatment. And then also we lived in Mexico, and I was 16, 17, and it was just during, 2 years after Tlatelolco. It was during the Dirty War. I know some of you may have seen that movie Roma, you know, just the violence that was taking place. And you know, I personally had friends that would be just for no reason picked up and put in jail. Students were being hauled out of, you know, classrooms and disappeared. It was a brutal, brutal, you know, time in Mexico. And that, you know, clearly it was the government total abuse of their power and using the military to put down movements of students and workers. So when I returned and I got into College of San Mateo, it was a center of organizing in terms of what was for the peninsula. And there was basically like a tutorial center, and students kind of took it over and turned it into escuela as we wanted to see it, what we thought, you know, education should be about. So even though, you know, there were all the classes in the community college, but the college readiness program became a real place for ideological development, you know, and organizing, learning about organizing. It was just really incredible just to be in the middle of that. And there was a concept of coming from, you know, kind of a Chicano consciousness, but then into what does it mean to be a third world, like a colonized people, to have a third world alliances, because there were students that were involved with the Black Panthers. There were students involved with American Indian movement, you know, out of this amazing space. People went off and formed the Venceremos Brigade, and, you know, I was doing translation for, you know, Basta Ya newspaper. It was just an amazing time, an amazing place to be. And it was very formative. You know, I just, coming from what I had experienced in Mexico, I just really wanted to understand what, you know, what was meant by being in the belly of the beast. You know, what was our relationship to other countries in the world? So I began learning about that concept of the third world, learning about colonization, imperialism, and just the special power that we had as colonized people within the United States to perhaps, you know, shake down, you know, and some change that would help not only us, but also people in other countries. And from there, you know, I still wasn't, I don't know, you know, just voting really wasn't a priority for me. You know, I would always vote because my parents taught me to always vote. But when I came back to San Jose and got involved in grassroots organizing and efforts to expose police brutality, get justice for people that had been shot by the police, that's when I saw, you know, community organizing, community voice. We needed people, you know, in our government that would truly be able to hear our concerns. So that's when I really began to, I saw that voting was not the answer in itself, but it was an important tactic, you know, within an overall, you know, revolutionary approach to social change. You know, and I came to understand that our spirituality too, and became a danzante, and right on the, not too long after Laura, it was 1990, you know, we were getting ready for the quincentennial, the indigenous response to the quincentennial. And so I said, I want to, no, 1992, I want to be dancing. So I got myself into Escalipoca with the Shomasa. And so I feel very, like, you know, Creator has put me in these incredible spaces and places in my life, but I also think it was in a momentum established by my parents, my grandmother and my parents. My father helped organize walkouts against the bombing in Cambodia. He was teaching Spanish at De Anza College. And so I helped, you know, organize walkouts at my high school. So they were very against the Vietnam War, you know, and so it's just something in our family that I feel very, very blessed, you know, to have had certain values that were inculcated, you know, into me about what is justice. And that's just been deepened through my own spiritual path and through the work with as a cultural worker through teatro, and understanding that we work with people in terms of experience and creating a vision, you know, that shaped by self-determination. And that's what can animate us to then have that confianza, you know, and that ánimo to make the kinds of changes that need to be made.
Thank you so much, Elisa, for that beautiful perspective. And for the audience here, you can see, right, that there's definitely a weaving, a braiding of sorts that happens in folks' stories of suffrage. And oftentimes it isn't simply by way of what we learn that we should be doing, it's that what we're compelled to do that is necessary and just in terms of fighting for equity and social justice for so many of our communities that we carry with us into this work. So Elisa, thank you so much for sharing from Blanca's kitchen, you know, where a lot of activism happens. We gather around the kitchen, we gather in the salas, we gather in these spaces where there is a lot of power. And it's not power from that egocentric power over, but power alongside community, to really listen, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing that I've learned from spaces as an Aztec dancer, as a danzante, is that it's a circle and there's room for everybody. And more people get here, you make the circle bigger. And there's room to make more circles within the circles. Y ahí llegamos todos, right? And so thank you for reminding us that it is important. All three of you so far have reminded us that our stories of suffrage are not linear in that same mainstream narrative. They're much more complex. They're much more a braided way of being in the world that is based on our cultural values of community and responsibility. And in a lot of ways, palabra, right? That discipline that we have in our own lives to not so much lead by example, but to follow, right? And to listen in a good way. Thank you everyone for being here in this program with us. At this time, I'm going to ask Dulce, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and letting us spotlight you. And I'm gonna go ahead and put Dulce's bio in the chat as well. She's phenomenal force, right? Always has the best shades of lipstick ready to go. And that's important. That's important in so many ways. And so for our audience, feel free to chime in with your questions in the chat. I'm trying to grab those when I see them so that we can address them in the Q&A. But I'm letting the women talk, right? And not because I'm giving them permission, but because they're saying what needs to be said, and they will say these things in whatever amount of time that needs to be had. We are going to try to honor our 8 o'clock, timing, but I'm not concerned with whether or not we can get through the other layer of questions. The stories that are being shared here, the words and the wisdom and the just our history, it's important. And so thank you all for sharing the multi-layered pieces and parts of that trenza. And Dulce, I will mute myself now and let you take center stage. I'm so sorry. You don't need my permission, but you know what I'm saying.
I know. Buenas noches, everyone, and I'm just very honored and grateful to be a part of this. When you told me, I was like, I don't know. I'm really not a person of a lot of words and in front of everybody. It's more of a one-on-one conversation. But I'm very grateful, and I'm thank you for putting this on because our voices need to be heard. And so I want to start by honoring, I am the daughter of Silvestre and Rosa Gutierrez. I am the sister to Miko and Junior and a lot of other folks. And I have 3 beautiful boys born and raised here in San Jose, and my husband. And I'm just honored again to be here. I do carry in my heart and in my work just the 2 strongest women that I've had. My mom is still here, and my aunt. So I carry them with them because they are the ones that if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't know the rhyme or reason of becoming a strong woman, and as of a couple of years ago, the word chingona was like a taboo. And so, when you had the stickers, Rosanna, I would bring it to my mom and she's like, oh, no, don't say that. But, I do come from a different type of suffering. Like my parents, migrated like everybody else from Mexico, from Zacatecas and Durango. And at a dance downtown in San Jose, they met and they fell in love, and, the rest is history. But I was born and raised here in San Jose, and I can honestly say the impact of community really came from being segregated in middle school. Where my address is, I'm supposed to be at Burnett Middle School, which is now Loney. And they had a segregation early in the 90s where they would ship a lot of us Mexicanos to Castellero Middle School, to Hoover, to John Muir, which was almost an hour and a half on the bus because you would have these little pit stops. And so we would have to wake up at 5 in the morning to be at the bus stop by 5:45 so that we could be on time at school in Almaden Valley, coming from the east side, going to Almaden Valley at 8 o'clock. And then, you needed extra help because you don't know the area, you don't have the, the things that families on that side of San Jose had. And so we would have to take the late bus. So we wouldn't get back until 6:30, 7 o'clock. My mother always worked nights. And so there was, those years of only seeing my mom on a Saturday and Sunday. My father worked very, very hard and instilled that work ethic with me. Even when you're sick, you're going to work. It doesn't matter, you're going to work. In an emergency, you're going to work. But I have those values from my parents, and I'm very grateful for those. And I try to instill that with my own boys. And, with the whole red lipstick, and I do have to share this because I think it's very powerful. When I went to Castro, they would mispronounce my name. And I would say, no, it's Dulce. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, translation, it's like candy, sweet. So I would always joke around. I'd be like, dulce de leche, and they would be like, excuse me? And I'd be like, okay, just, whatever you can pronounce. And I would get very, very stern with them and say, no, it's not candy. It's not Candice. It's dulce. And so from that day on, it became this like, okay, me against them. And so my cousins, I would always hang out with them over here off of Story and White. And so there was a Long's drugstore. And I remember I got my first Revlon lipstick, and it was a red, like a dark, deep maroon red. And when at middle school, they would say, oh, no, you can't wear that. Are you in a gang? And I'm like, it doesn't matter if I'm in a gang or not. Why are you telling me this? While the other ladies are wearing pink lipstick or other types of lipstick. So that really stuck to me. And so for all the comunidad in San Jose know me by my red lipstick. And if I have no lipstick, they'll say, Dulce, what's wrong? Are you sick? What's going on? Talk about it. And so to this, it's not a statement of fashion or nothing. This is my true identity, because I want you to know that wherever you come from and whatever your family has given you, you keep on going. Like my first son, his name's Angel. And his friends might call him Angel, but at home, it's Angel, And so just little things like that really got me motivated into my comunidad. When I got into high school at San Jose High, it was the same thing. It was about, protesting 187 with Pete Wilson and all that. And we had a group that, Adriana Garcia, that I think she's on here, she really helped move this movement of not just, oh, we're going to cut school and we're going to go to Roosevelt. No, this was a movimiento of all the high schools coming together and joining as one and saying, hey, enough is enough. We had all the gangs coming, whether it's Sureños, Norteños, we had the Vietnamese, we had the African Americans, and we came together. And that really made a movement, not just in the neighborhood, but the sense that, I can trust you. And from there, I was a youth at the Moxa Youth Center. And one of my first female mentors was Esther Medina. Yeah, first she scared me because she would look at you like, and with her hair. Pero once you really got to sit down and talk with her, she was just incredible. And I've been very blessed that every time I had to get into a position of employment or, I'm changing a job, I don't really have to apply for the job. It's kind of like Creator guides me to where I need to be. And here in San Jose, my passion and my everything is to help my community, especially with kids that are in juvenile justice, that are at the ranch, that are at the hall, and now at adult probation, because it's the same generation that's coming, in full circle, unfortunately. And so, with that, it was just a reality check, and from the Moxa Youth Center, going from their tattoo removal to job placement, I went to Catholic Charities for 14 years, and I found another mujer that just blew me away. She's the one that I always say kidnapped me from Moxa to Catholic Charities, and that's Tamara Alvarado, who was a powerhouse here in San Jose. And I will never forget, I was like, she's like, oh, you need to do better. You need to, keep on going with your education. And at that time, I was just having my first child, and I kind of did everything backwards. I got married early and I had my children. And so she's like, never stop your education. And she's like, I went to Stanford. And I was like, what? Like, that's a big thing, you know? You hear about Stanford, you hear maybe about a family member that used to work at Stanford, maybe as a janitor or maybe as a, you know, groundskeeper. But she really made things possible, and she opened up so many great opportunities for myself. You know, for the past 25 years, I worked at juvenile hall and at the ranch with families that, you know, do have a lot of post-traumatic stress, you know, and they have a lot of trauma, you know, and in our comunidad, in our circles, you know, that's kind of taboo unless you really know someone and you feel like I can open up to them. And so now where I'm currently at, I'm a disaster worker, and I'm actually, the county put me at a motel in Milpitas, and I'm helping the homeless seniors that are most vulnerable of catching COVID. And it really humbleizes you. It really makes you, number one, treasure what you have, whether it's a little bit, whether it's food on the table, whether it's a nice place to come home. But it takes in a lot of emotion because every story is different. You have homeless that come from Mexico 30, 40 years ago and always worked, but never got, you know, that next step of becoming, you know, an American citizen. Then you do have your homeless that have alcohol or mental health issues. And so, like I said, I'm very blessed to be here sharing my story. And if there's anything that I can do, you know, moving forward, I'm always a phone call away. That's the way I roll with the families that I work with the youth that I work with, you know, and I'm very humble. I still live here in the East Side. And even, you know, with my own kids, I tell them, I want to leave a legacy for you. You know, the same way my family, my mom and dad instill all these values, I want to instill this plus more, because they're now the second generation here. And, you know, as men and as men of color, you know, I have a 19-year-old, I have a 15-year-old, and I have a 12-year-old. I try to instill these values because I know for them it's going to be harder when you have the system against you, when you have sometimes companies against you just because of your name or the way you look or where you're from. And everything is possible, you know, with education right now. I'm trying to finish up my master's, and it's not for me. It's more for my parents that had, you know, an education that's, you know, primaria. It's you know, they were working at such a young age that they didn't have the luxury to finish their middle school or high school years. So everything I do it with heart, I do it with compassion, and I do it with empathy. Because I think without them, you're just doing it for a paycheck. I'm not here for a title. I'm not here for, you know, sitting pretty and saying, oh, it's 5 o'clock. No, you know, if it takes until 7, 8 o'clock, as long as someone is safe, that's all that matters. So again, I thank you guys. I thank you all. And we're keep on going Chicanas right here. Okay. I love you guys.
Much love to you too, mujer. You know, one time we showed up to the plaza and we were like lipstick twins. And it was like, I see you seeing me. And now let's take a picture because it's important for all of those reasons that you called out in the beginning of your sharing, right? That a lot of how we show up is a declaration in itself. And that a lot of times, even if we show up as neutral and, you know, mainstream professional look as possible, we're still going to be met with hostility in some spaces. And so showing up with that red lipstick, exactly. Showing up with that red lipstick is totally subversive. In 1 second, we got a soundtrack going on in the back. And I don't think, you know, technology has its own glitchiness, but I'm going to take signs from the universe that we're here in declaration and affirmation, and as really showing up in spaces that are necessary. And so thank you for gathering with me. We do have one more panelist who we haven't heard from yet, and I'm eager to hear from Christina Morales Guzman, who I met in my college days at Santa Clara University, and I don't even know if she knows this, but she just was that example of being, I think, probably 1 whole year older than me, but showing up into it and realizing that there were people who have been in those spaces and who are taking up space and being authentic and unapologetic and pushing for the same values that I had. And so it just had a lot to do with that example, right? That tenacity, that who she carried with her into the space had a ripple effect on so many people. And what we're seeing here from the stories in this space is that that holds true for each and every one of us, and that we have a responsibility toward that end, right? So Christina, without further ado, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, and I'm gonna go ahead and put your bio in the chat as well. You've done so much work, and you come from a mix of communities, and I'll let you, again, your story, I can't wait to see how it fits in with the whole trenza of what we're seeing happening here. So let me mute myself.
Hey, I see you. I see, sorry, some of the chat. Well, first, let me just say thank you so much, gracias a todos, for being here on a Thursday evening. If you're like me, I'm navigating currently. I'm also a mom. I have 4 kids and 3 boys who are currently doing distance learning, which I've taught. I mean, I was a college professor and adjunct lecturer for over a decade. But teaching my own kids is a whole other situation, right? Like I have a lot less patience. And then I have a 4-year-old, so she's dynamite, but she's also all over the place. So it's been quite a stressful week. But I just wanted to say thank you. I feel sad to go last because everybody's stories were so amazing. I kept thinking, oh, maybe I'll go next. But I just wanted to quickly, before I even start, actually say thank you to Laura Castro. And I don't know if you remember many years ago in the late 90s, I actually for a time came and danced with your group. I was with my friend Liz Gonzalez at the time, and Paul, and everybody called me China. China's my nickname. I'll kind of get to that part of the identity. And I wasn't able to do it for a long time because mostly I didn't have a car and they were the ones that drove me around. But in the story that I'm actually going to share today about how I've come to be who I am, you were actually a pivotal part of that, because part of my sort of awakening and identity was really like interacting and learning from you and from Robert and from your family, and just the example that you gave in terms of not just like, you were about that life, and that to me was everything at that time. So I mean, I just feel like the lessons that I learned from spending that time, as minimal as it was, really impacted how I ended up moving forward in mine. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you guys did for all of us. We were all super young. I was like a senior in high school, and it was just, it really meant so much to me. So thank you. So who am I? I'm actually a woman who grew up mostly in Gilroy, California. My dad grew up in Gilroy, and part of my story is that I'm mixed race. So I mean, you can tell kind of there's some other things going on here, but my dad is Mexican, Chicano. My mom is actually Korean. They met when my dad was stationed in South Korea in the 70s. They met, they were married. They had me. I was actually born in Seoul. And then when my dad got out of the service, we moved to Gilroy. And so most of my formative years, public education in Gilroy, California, which I've had extensive conversations with Rosanna about, because she's experiencing that as the parent and I experienced it as a student. Unfortunately, not a lot has changed, and that's kind of a shame, but we'll get to that probably later as well. Went on to Santa Clara University. And I grew up, my dad, which is the Mexican side, the Chicano side of my family, they were farm workers. My dad was born in Tulare, and they moved pretty much everywhere, and mostly settled in Gilroy because at the time they were working, in the fields there in Gilroy and Morgan Hill and South San Jose. So they ended up putting their roots there. And, in the question of like, who do you carry? I kind of have two parts to that. So the beginning part of my like identity journey, I definitely carried my family with me. I just want to shout out too, my grandma just turned 90 on September 1st. And in speaking about, sufrimientos and remedios, my grandmother's name is actually Remedios. And that's my middle name. I was named after her, and I carry that proudly. But she was a single mom of 12 kids. My dad was number 9 of 12, and brought up this beautiful family that, like, growing up, we were so close all the time that, like, my primos, they're more like brothers and sisters, because that's how close my tios were. And so we just kind of grew up with this like really big, wonderful, lots of memory making, and everything was really centered around my grandma. And those are kind of like my early memories of just kind of knowing who I was. So I feel that family experience really kind of created this confidence that I didn't actually, I wasn't probably aware that I had until I was a bit older, like late teens, early 20s. But I, am fortunate to have a lot of strong women, my grandmother, my tias, my mom, all who really endured a lot and came out on the other side, in my opinion, triumphant. And the lessons that I've been able to learn from them, again, I carry with me. So I kind of took a little bit of a different route. Given that I'm biracial, there was, a lot of soul searching in terms of identity. But what really kind of hooked me early on, and to kind of piggyback off Dulce, was like the Prop 187. So that was 1994, and that was really sort of my first deep engagement with political activism. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was there marching, carrying a sign downtown Gilroy, thinking I was all big and bad, all 5'1" of myself. And, through that, it really kind of got me to question a lot. And I had a friend back in the day that told me, it's once you start learning about who you are and how you fit into community, it's like opening your eyes and you can never close them again, right? So it's like once your eyes are open, it's what you see. And so that deep curiosity really followed me throughout sort of my academic journey. So my sort of journey into these questions of who I am are really, they're rooted in who I am in terms of my community, in terms of my family, but then also who I wanted to become in my life. And that really led me to this academic space where I was deeply rooted in political activism, but also how that meshed with education. And so I grew up poor, working class. Again, my dad was a farm worker. My mom is an immigrant she's first generation. On my dad's side, I'm actually fourth generation because it was my bisabuelos who came to California during the revolution. They met and were married during the revolution years, and then migrated to Southern California in the 19-teens. And so my grandmother grew up down in LA, and then she eventually met my grandfather, got married, and they settled in Gilroy. And that's kind of how that side of the family ended up there. But then when I got to my undergraduate years, I was fortunate, and Rosanna and I had shared, a professor who was a mentor, who has since passed, but Dr. Ramon Chacon. And he was actually the first person who I met who, I connected with, because he had this experience of, he was from Fresno and also was, grew up in a farm working family, and then became this professor, but he did it in a way that didn't, he didn't leave behind what he was before. He brought all of Fresno up in Santa Clara with him. And so when you were in his class, you felt West Fresno. And that to me was amazing, because he really kind of showed me that you didn't have to change who you were to mold into something that the institution wanted you to be, that you could be who you were and work within the institution. And so he was the person who actually encouraged me to think about getting a doctoral degree. And before that, first of all, growing up again in sort of like a poor working class community, that wasn't even like a thing that I thought you could do. Like, I knew that there were professors, but like how you actually became one was not something I was knowledgeable about. And so he really was the person who kind of held my hand through that process. And I ended up getting my doctoral degree in history from UC Santa Cruz. And, you know, one of the main motivators when you think of like pivotal moments in your life, like my freshman year of college, I went to the National Mecha Conference, which at that time was at UCLA. It was like the best experience of my life. We road tripped down there with a bunch of machistas, and I just felt, you know, really this sense of belonging in a way that I had never felt before. And that political awakening was really like blossomed at that time. And the keynote speaker at that event was Antonia Hernandez, who was one of the former presidents of Maldives. And when she talked, I wanted to be her. I was like, everything about her just really resonated with me. I wanted to kind of do all the things that she was doing. She was a history major in college. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to become a lawyer. I didn't obviously become a lawyer, but the funny thing is that when I finally did decide to get a doctoral degree in history, she also ended up being the keynote speaker at my best friend's college graduation, Mills College. So she bookended my undergraduate experience. So I saw her as a freshman and then again as a senior. And in the Mills College keynote, she talked about how her wish, even though she became a lawyer, was always to be a Chicana historian. So I thought that was like kind of, you know, we're connected now. So we're like best friends in my mind. So yeah, I ended up doing that. And really the motivator to get that degree was to really be in the space of academia. And again, like my, you know, examples that I had before me was to do so in a way that was authentically to myself and to bring all of myself and to really challenge, especially at predominantly white institutions, these notions of what a professor was supposed to be, was supposed to look like, and also to kind of show students who were like me, who maybe hadn't had any ethnic studies or any, you know, history, like Chicano history, Chicana history, Chicanx, to really kind of show those students that, hey, there are these like options to really learn about your identity. And there's so much more than what's offered in K through 12, which is basically at that time was nothing. So, you know, my motivator was really to kind of be that presence in a space that really didn't want us to fit in there. And like one of the main kind of things that I would tell my students is that you don't wait for someone to give you permission. You give yourself permission to be in the space and occupy the space. And it's not always easy because you will be met with resistance, and that's okay, because that's why we're here. You know, because we're here to kind of change, shift, shatter. And along the way, you know, if I had a couple of white students who maybe I changed their sort of point of view, that to me was just like icing on the cake as well. So I spend a lot of time really kind of in and out of the sort of lecturing cycle. And I really love the time that I engage with students, and in the in-between still being involved, you know, with political activism as much as I can. Because for me, as far as the second part of who I carry, so in the beginning, I would say it would have been like family and, you know, the legacy of the people who fought like in the civil rights movement, or if you even want to go back to like suffragists, right? Like in the 19-teens, because there were Latinas who did fight and organize for women's suffrage at that time as well, women of color in general. But now I would also kind of add that I carry future generations, right? So as like a middle-aged mom of preteen and little kids, I actually really think about how my actions as an individual and our actions as a community is really going to impact the future. So now this isn't just a fight for me and a fight for, you know, changing our society, but really kind of enabling us to like have hope that we can make these shifts so that when our kids are older, they're able to kind of, you know, experience hopefully something a little bit better than what we experienced and not have to go through the same struggles. But then also, you know, trying to raise kind, compassionate, empathetic community members, right, at the same time. And, you know, we talk to our kids all the time about social justice issues. And, you know, some people in my life I've asked, like, do you really, you have a 7-year-old, you really tell him about like Black Lives Matters? Yes, I do. We do talk about it. We have those conversations early and often, because it's never too early to get them engaged, right? I don't want them to kind of wake up one day and see, oh crap, there's all this injustice in the world. Where'd this come from? I want them to know about it and to know that they have power to make change. So yeah, so when it comes to who I carry, I guess for me, I feel like it's a little bit of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. And as much as you said, that stress of going last, I trust that things work out the way they need to. And it was just a beautiful speaking truth to that idea that we're all interconnected and interwoven. And we've been saying this in our struggle to fight for justice and equity out here in Gilroy, knowing that I grew up in East San Jose, and that every one of you on the screen here, and some, even some of the guests, have been a part of my own story in so many ways that you all have shared here in this space without even knowing, right? And so even as my days as a high school student, I remember going to these portraits of success platicas, and I remember Blanca being on the microphone and being like, oh my goodness, people like me can actually do things like that. And that was important. And I also, like Christina, thought I was going to go on and be an attorney, and that had its own windy path. And I remember more recently, it's hard being that facilitator in learning spaces with young adults who are looking to you for how to form their own sense of awareness and politicization and all of that stuff. And I remember you brought your stroller and your babies, and you were like, that's right, we're gonna have coffee right here and just talk to me, real talk, right? And so many of you have been a part of that journey as well. Laura with danza and leading by example, and being so generous with your family and sharing of the cultura, and Elisa with your teatro work that you did and healing in general, and Dulce just reminding us by way of that red lipstick, that so much so that when I did take time to draw a little black and white simplified illustration of you, the red lipstick was essential, right? For all the reasons you've called out here. And so I just really appreciate every one of you on here for sharing a bit of yourselves. And we had 3 questions that we prepared, but I knew this in all of my years of facilitating conversations like this, that each of you could probably have your own 2-hour segment. And selfishly, I may be reaching out to you for follow-up conversation, because we've been saying in this struggle out here in Gilroy that what folks don't realize is that we are all connected by 2 degrees of separation at most, right? And most times we're directly connected. And sometimes it's because we have to rely on each other for our collective sanity and our coming into our own, space of how to listen better to community. And sometimes simply because when you oppress the number of folks who can achieve higher education and or spaces and or access to certain types of jobs or work, we're going to know each other. And it's very much a dynamic of familia and suffrage. And as much as that play on words of poetry and action, that suffrage really does connect to our sufrimiento with Corazón. And so there's balance, right? And it's not a suffering without joy. There is joy there. There's danza there. There's beauty there. There's cultura there. And so I just appreciate you so much. And we are getting into the final half hour. And, I think most of you have addressed the second question about who you are and who you carry is directly connected to your stories of suffrage. It's directly connected to that idea of the personal as political. It's directly connected to this idea as community, and the work toward helping our community stand in its power is critical to our own coming into the importance of why voting is one piece of the struggle, one piece of our story. And it's not linear, it is intergenerational, it does cycle back, it does bridge us across communities in overlapping beautiful ways. And so I thank you all for bringing that to life in this space and in your lives generally. What I will do is go ahead and throw out that last question, which is loaded in and of itself. But if you all wouldn't mind offering some perspective on, we're all feeling the urgency of this moment. So what next, given that urgency of this moment? And I realize that that's a rather broad question, and it's intentionally broad. It can be personal, collective, a general call to action, or a call to ground ourselves in our histories. But what next, given the urgency of the times? What next as we continue to activate our own stories of suffrage?
I saw that Blanca Alvarado wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Darlene.
Yes. Rosanna, I have been absolutely moved by the testimony that I've heard tonight. But I am reminded that while I have lived all of my entire life as an activist, it has been with other people, never alone. I think that's the main message that resonates over and over again, that nothing is accomplished in this world by oneself. It has to be in collaboration with others. And even though I spent my years with various organizations, the friendships that have endured and the relationships that continue to this day are rich and meaningful. But it's important also to remember that while I served for almost 30 years in a position of influence and authority, one of the things that oftentimes is overlooked is not only the institution building that were created during my terms in office, but the people that I hired and that had tremendous success in the fields of government. For example, my staff members were primarily women. I may have had 2 or 3 males, but the majority of my staffers were women. And even to this day, I look back and I see them on occasion and marvel at the influence that they have had in their chosen positions after I left office, because they're all continuing to work in city government or county government, and they're all doing fabulous work, because not only are they bringing expertise, but they're bringing corazón, they're bringing the empathy and the connection to community that is so important in validating the work of public service. If you don't have corazón, you just do it, as Dulce said, for the money. And we are not in it for the money, because we work hard, but we work with the motivation and with the dedication and with the principle of always seeking to advance the steps towards justice, one step closer. But in terms of where are we at today, it's a very, very different world. My world, when I began in politics, was very different. We were a small community when I came to California, or when I came to San Jose. It was a population of 70,000. Now it's 1 million. So times are totally, totally changed. The ways of communicating, collaborating, and doing work together is very different. But the issues are monumental. And one of the things that we absolutely have to pursue at all levels is to encourage our young people to be civic minded and to engage in politics, because politics rules every aspect of our lives. And we have seen in more recent times how detrimental the political choices that have been made by the citizens of this country have created an environment that is hostile, that is cruel, that is mean, that cares nothing about others. We have to care about others, and that means we have to vote. And for our young people to engage in politics is more crucial now than ever. And how do we go about doing that? First of all, by assuming that sense of civic responsibility that we all hold, but knowing as well that we have seen in the last 4 years, while a terrible administration is running this government, we have seen so many success stories electorally. that the optimism for the future remains high. On the other hand, we are also facing not only political challenges, but along with that goes what is happening to the environment. How serious must we be about living at a time that the planet is so endangered, that we are all endangered? And to the extent that we put on our environmental hats and go out and do what is necessary to advocate and to push for the kind of legislations that cleans up the planet, that is one of the main reasons why young people today have to get involved in politics. I look at my life, it's been a good life. I want my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and generations to come to see the beauty of the planet that I was born and raised into. And unless we step up to the plate and do the necessary work of electing the right people, getting ourselves elected into office as well, participating civically, doing what good citizens are required to do, not just fight wars, but really pay taxes. We really have to be engaged. And I would strongly, strongly say there is nothing more rewarding, more satisfying than being part of a movement with other people of goodwill to making life better in the future. We all have that expectation that the work that we do is to better the future for all. And again, to the kids that are out there or to all of the people that are on the chat, we must spend the next few weeks animating, inviting, urging, doing what is necessary to get the strongest vote out, especially of Latinos.
Thank you so much, Senora Blanca. Definitely necessary, and your words are always fire.
Can I piggyback on that? Okay. Yes, I 1000% agree. I also wanted to just like make a quick emphasis too on really focusing. So obviously it is probably one of the most monumental, the upcoming election is one of the most monumental elections of our generation, right? Because there's just so much happening. I mean, and every day something new gets revealed, and I'm sure you guys are the same as I am, where we're just at a point where you're not even surprised anymore because it's like to be expected, right? That there's just like horrific stuff. And I don't want to detract from that focus, but I also want to encourage people to really become familiar with and engage with what's happening at the local level. Because part of it is, while we do have like our national sort of crises that are happening, it's the local level that's really going to deeply impact you, your community, your kids. So, I mean, I do find sometimes that, I mean, this is just anecdotal, but when I talk to, folks in my life, it's like we talk a lot about like senators, and we talk, and again, all these things are important, but when you really kind of ask, well, who's on your city council, and and who's on the school board, and just like even like who's the hall monitor, just whoever it is, you need to know who that person is, and you need to kind of put your votes towards the person that that is going to be the one that's going to advocate for you. So it's like when we don't engage in our politics at a local level, within our city, within our county, changes will happen, quote unquote, behind the scenes, because we haven't done the research. So I really encourage people, when you get your ballot information, go through that, have a cafecito with your friend, like talk about it, do your own research, don't rely on just the media or flyers or whatever to feed your opinion. Like really kind of get into the nitty gritty, like who is this person, what are they going to do for me, and also know that you have power as an individual to say, hey, this person could potentially be a candidate for my school board, but to perfectly kind of segue into the work that Rosanna and others are doing currently, like in Gilroy, with the situation with the digital divide, right? With the students there who are being grossly ignored and neglected in the situation that we're having with pandemic distance learning. It's like, really, we need to have folks in there that are going to advocate on our behalf. And some of that does happen at the political level of voting, and also if you're so inclined, be that person. If you are wanting to make change or see change affected in your community, one of the best ways that you can do that is at the local level. Even if it's a little like commissioner position, you'd be surprised at like how much stuff is like available that people don't ever even sign up for because it's never advertised. And if it's not advertised, then, and we don't know about it, then how are we, you know, able to kind of get in there to affect change? And let me tell you, the other side, they know this stuff and they get involved. And that's kind of how we end up with these kind of crazy political situations where all of a sudden everybody on your city council is like a conservative, because they kind of slide in there, and if no one else is doing it, they're going to do it because they're trying to maintain their own power, and we have to take that power back, and we do have the ability to do so. So I just wanted to you know, say that that civic engagement is important, but also just really kind of dedicating yourself to knowing who these people are and what they're about and how they're going to best serve you as a member of the community.
Amazing. It really is about that collective accountability, right? A lot of what the mujeres on here have spoken about is an effort to put in work to keep ourselves accountable to community and to really help people step into their power who already have power, right? But are being suppressed in the moment, whether it be their voting rights, whether it be their right to equally access their education. It's all connected. And so thank you, Christina, for offering that perspective and connecting those dots. It really does matter, right? Even the communications secretary has the power to suppress public comment in a meeting for the times right now. And so we got to pay attention, and we do have to be we have to bring the whole village to be vigilant in that accountability, right? But what Dulce?
Okay, I just wanted to piggyback because again, you know, with the digital divide, with our communities, with giving those voices back to people, and also in our native language. You know, we're so rich in cultura here. We have so many that, oh, well, it's not in my language, I don't know. Well, you know, it's to the point where now we can just Google it and it comes out, right? And so this generation is all about a cell phone, on my computer, on those little TikTok things. So we need to start presenting and giving the information back to them. You know, it's not like in our generation, you know, where it was just like, oh, take this paper home and have your parents read it. Now there is no communication. And now we're more, you know, with this COVID thing, we are in our little bubbles, where the only communication we get is either something that has to go viral, something that happened in the community that everybody's shocked about. But again, it's having that talk and not being, how can I say it? It's okay to not have the same point of view, but at least have that communication, because sometimes it's ignorance that kills us. And the thing is that right now, a lot of our parents or grandparents that are taking care of our young children, they don't know. They just, oh, está en la computadora, you know, they're just on the computer. But it's actually getting that conversation. And if you can vote, telling them, have you registered? Have you done this? You know, and for those that have, you know, that know the system a little bit better, it's really getting engaged in your familia and in your community to say, look, let's all do this together. We're not separated. And so, you know, what we've been discussing at work lately is how do we get the homeless vote? You know, how do we get something as simple as registering them right now in the address they're in right now? We can still make that change. And so going back to even our kids that are locked up, you still have family out here that can vote. And so again, it's having that talk. And sometimes, you know, we don't have that discussion because there's other things we have to worry about. Food, we have to worry about shelter, we have to worry about other things. But if we don't worry in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have, again, 2020 for the next 4 years. So again, guys, it's having that talk, having that discussion. And again, it's okay if, you know, another person has their opinion, but give your sense of view and give that strong, valid points of what can happen again. and just having that communication. I think it's so important. And again, I want to thank you guys all, because I think by us having this voice tonight, we're going to open so many doors within our communities. And I will see you guys on Sunday.
Thank you so much, Dulce. Definitely, I'm hearing folks saying we gotta get out and vote. We gotta figure out how to get our gente registered. If there are currently barriers to those registration processes, we have to be vigilant about what's happening locally. And by locally, we mean, yes, in the political landscape, but also with our definition of what the political landscape includes, which includes our household, right? It includes our community of homeless populations by force. And so taking care of all of us is how we really do truth to power and carry out the legacy of the work that you all have talked about, that you've committed your lives to outside of this space. And it's a heart hustle of sorts, right? And it requires us being able to support each other. And before we officially started the program, Senora Blanca had mentioned that it's important to also know our history. And so we do have archives in the library. San Jose State is phenomenal in that way. And there are folks who are actively, Estela Inda, for example, going out into the East Side and making sure that our stories are archived. And that is exactly the work of La Raza Historical Society as well, is making sure that we are archiving these histories and also making them accessible and engaging with that history. And so this platica really is an effort to engage us with this history and to not just activate us, but sustain us, because it's hard, right? It's hard not being able to go back after you become that aware of how everything works. And the political landscape in particular can be relentless. And still, we have so many examples of phenomenal women here who have shown up relentlessly throughout different generations and in each other's lives for community, alongside community. And I know we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure that we have time to do a little bit of a Q&A. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat in the interest of time, and we'll address those. And while we're gathering our questions here, if we could acknowledge a couple of our collaborators in the room. We have Pratima Pandey from the Office of Women's Policy, who supports these Tea Talks by way not just of funding, but with presence and showing up, and a phenomenal team that has done tremendous work in this valley for quite some time. Pratima, would you mind unmuting yourselves and just speaking?
Oh,
WP?
this is so hard to follow, because the courageous women who spoke before me are the reason that many of us can do the work that we do. Our founder is on this panel, so I am nervous, because as a supervisor, Blanca Alvarado took this upon herself. Patriarchy was not taken for granted in the county of Santa Clara. 22 years ago, it was her vision that established our office. And today, here we are, creating community because of what was done 22 years ago by one among us right now. And that is where I want to ask everybody to remember the legacy of the suffragists. Yes, 100 years ago, I didn't get my right to vote. Rosanna, I know you didn't get your right to vote. We're still in the centennial year. Why? Because there were women who came before us. They challenged norms. They fought for each of us. And they said, look, I'll crack the door open. You got to walk with me, right? Christina mentioned Prop 187. In the Chicana movement, Prop 187 demonstrated how the community came together, how the community said, you can't tell us what we need to do to access what is for us. That fight is crucial, and I'm glad that it's happening. We're having these conversations in the historical context, because somebody said it is important for us to intergenerationally talk about this work so that we remember the legacies of those who fought, remind ourselves about the tenacity of those who are still fighting, and promise ourselves that we will keep this fight on so we can hand it over to the next generation. And that's all I share with each of you. I attended this to learn from you, and oh my God, what did I get? I got power, strength, community, and the courage to keep up the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reflecting that back to the women in this panel. And I did also want to open up space for Maria Luisa Lanis from San Jose State University, who is definitely here because I see her on the screen. But Maria Luisa, if you wouldn't mind just offering some words about the program, I could sing it praises all day. I feel like the poster child of Chicana Studies Master's Program. And what can you do with the Chicana Studies degree? Let me tell you, because I am a product of that same program, and now I get to teach and work with students in that same space. And take it away, Maria Luisa.
Well, Rosanna, I think you exemplify Chicana and Chicano studies. What more can I say? You've done an amazing job today, and I am just so honored and excited to be a part of this event. And I thank you so much for including Chicana and Chicano studies, including me. It's been a wonderful experience. I truly believe that we cannot understand the significance of the events that occur in our society today without knowing a historical context. And one of the things that really inspires me, you know, I'm old enough to have been a part of the Chicano movement, work with the UFW. And one of the things that inspires me is to see the younger generation, to see the resistance movement. But especially for me, it's so wonderful to see the connections that the young people are making to history. You see that they know the history. You see that they make the connections with the things that have happened in the past, the things that have happened to our ancestors. And they're doing some real deep analysis and critique in developing the resistance movements. And I see this with the students. You know, I've been teaching at San Jose State for 30 years, you know, and I see the difference in the students in terms of, you know, that term woke. You know, they are very, very aware of our history, the connections, and developing strategies in terms of what to do. So, you know, a lot of people feel very gloomy about the future, and rightly so. But I'm optimistic about the future because of our youth. And I tell my students that all the time. I tell them I'm hopeful because of you, because I see what you're gonna do in the future. So Rosanna, again, thank you so much for including us in this event. It's been an honor to co-sponsor. Gracias.
Thank you for sharing a little bit about the department in this space. And oftentimes, you know, I remember leaving law school and having folks say, you're gonna do what? You're gonna go get a master's in Chicana studies? And I'm like, yeah, no regrets, no regrets. I have no regrets about that. It definitely is a critical perspective that for many reasons, as expressed by the women on this panel, it's important information and it's interdisciplinary and it reflects so much complexity that is necessary to create change in these times, in this tenor of hostility that, you know, for a long time we were almost fooling ourselves thinking that it wasn't this bad. It was this bad, but it was behind closed doors, and now it's out in the open and it feels worse because it is so much more rampant when it's out in the open. And you know, it's hard to continue with this work. And so I thank you all for sharing your stories that will help continue to serve as remedios and good medicina for the rest of us. And I'm grateful that you are offering danza and cultura and fierce speaking, you know, truth to power in many spaces, including those formal political spaces, and that we're working with our most targeted populations for collective dignity. And I just thank you so much for continuing that work and for being these windows, mirrors, and doors for us to uphold each other in that struggle. And before we officially close off, I just want to give I keep saying just, because there are no combination of words that could accurately uphold the power of your presence. And I am not one for a loss of words, clearly, but in this situation, it's a whole lot of layers of feeling and heart in combination with our minds and our strategies and how we hold each other, literally and figuratively. And so I'm looking forward to when times are different and we can gather in community. But I think for now, it feels like a gathering that for me is that kind of energía that we try to tap into when we're gathering for ceremonia. So this to me feels like a ceremonia of sorts. And I thank you all for being a part of that. Again, I want to make sure that you get to say your pieces in these final 10 minutes before we bid everyone a buenas noches.
Rosanna?
Sí.
Hi, it's Consuelo.
Hi,
and hello, everybody. Hello, Blanca. Hello to all the other ladies that are here that I know. I just hope that this is the beginning of many more. We continue this process. We are a community, and we've got to push ourselves even more so. And, you know, I'm not trying to put it on the youth, but the fact is that we have laid the groundwork and we're still doing some work. But yes, we need the younger generation to be more active. And I would just challenge everybody in here to take at least 20 people that they're going to call tomorrow or by this week to say, are you going to vote? Are you going to vote? And increase that number. Give yourself your own number, 50, 100, 20, 10, but to be active about it. And definitely that, you know, we can't sit back and let this 2020 go by without some changes. But I do hope that this is the beginning of many more of these series. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Rodriguez. Definitely another, there are so many people in this Zoom right now that, you know, when we were trying to figure out who to host on this particular panel, so many people that we could have included and wanted to include, and I still want to. So I'm still going to reach out to you because I am shameless in that way. But figuring out how to elevate these stories, not for the sake of patting ourselves on the back, but just like you all said, for the sake of reflecting back, you know, that resilience to each other and the idea that we have each other in this moment. Even if we're not actively present in each other's lives, the stories are still very much active in our collective fabric of comunidad. And I did want to also make sure that I announced the next upcoming Tea Talk, which is scheduled for Tuesday, September 29th, 6:30 to 8 p.m., hosted by San Jose Women's Club. And that's all through the sweat and tears and good organizing and event planning of Darlene Tenes, also from Casa Q. Why are kids in cages? And so it is a timely discussion, right? If we're talking about really being aware and active and informed, critical. So that will be September 29th, 6:30 to 8. We'll linger here for a bit because there's so much important information in this chat. At some point, we would love to have a sit down with Nanette Regua, for example, who has written history books locally about not our suffrage in sí, but because of the same reasons you all have articulated here, it's the history and it connects to our suffrage in that way. And it's important to know that we have such movimiento, long-term trajectory, history, context, and that when we are frustrated in these spaces, there's a legacy there locally on top of our personal legacy. And it's important to share that with the next generation. And toward that end, I'll be parking some stuff on the La Raza Historical Society webpage, larazahs.org, including the stream or the restream of this video. And I will also be including a few other follow-up conversations through the hellachingona.com website that is home to the podcast, not in an effort to elevate me or my work, but in an effort to carry the responsibility of hosting conversations with many of you on screen right now so that we can share that with that next generation and so that we can ourselves find that resilience in the moment when we need it. Any final remarks from our panelists?
I want to say thank you. Gracias for this panel today, for everything that was said concerning voting, concerning all these things. But also, I just want to say thank you to all the parents out there that are going through this with the virtual distancing stuff, you know, the teaching, and really trying their hardest to get the education for the children. And then I want to thank Rosanna, the group that you're working with in Gilroy, that is trying to make that difference, because I think, you know, I listened to my daughter talking about this, listened to Yolanda talking about it with so much passion, sometimes lots of anger. And I think that it's important that we support you as much as possible. We as elders, or we as a people, as a community, come out and support what you're trying to do for the people, for the children and for the families. And so just, and for all of us to come out and vote. Yes, it's important to vote. And yes, it's important to get those leaders that are going to advocate for us, ¿verdad? Those with integrity and those with passion and love for our gente, not just anybody, ¿verdad? And yes, Christina, thank you very much for acknowledging me today, and for your words about wanting to us get to know those people in the district, and those people who are supposed to be there for our children, ¿verdad? And so, gracias otra vez, Christina, and gracias to each and every one of you that spoke today, and gracias to all those who tuned in, ¿verdad? Who came on to this to listen to us talk, and the words that we had to say. Gracias otra vez. Yo me teo.
All right, so we are in the last 3 minutes of our program, and I know we've all had a week, and I know I was looking forward to this panel, and it's really hard to say, yes, it's time. It is time to close out and officially say we have reached the end here. And again, as I say in several of these gatherings, it really isn't the end, right? It's for some of us a starting point of so many things. And for some of us, it's just a reminder, this little recuerdo that isn't little by any means, but definitely ongoing reminders that when we are outraged, that outrage has a function and it has a legacy, and it is a beautiful one. And oftentimes we are told to temper our outrage, and I don't think that that's necessary for the times, right? There are different ways to express that outrage. It could be a protest. It could be a town hall. It could be a platica in the kitchen with your comadre. It could be gathering at the park and dancing, social distance, of course, for now, but definitely seeing all of the Corazón alongside that Sufrimiento, because it's important to soltar el llanto in that way sometimes. And sometimes that llanto comes out in the way of a grito, and it's necessary. And so I really want to thank all of you for being here with us as an audience and as a panelist, and as just ongoing reminders and these declarations of resistance and affirmation, and reclaiming really of our communities as we push for justice together. And let's get that vote out, and let's also be vigilant of the areas where, you know, the voting has already happened and the hirings have already happened, and people are being paid to be accountable to our communities. And so we gather here in this space to give us that medicina, to have that ongoing sustainability in this work. And with that, I thank you all very much.
Can I just add one final thing? Don't forget to vote yes on Prop 16, which repeals 209.
Whatever that's about.
Yeah. That's a really important one.
We'll follow up with some of these, because some of us are learning and some of us are very informed, right? So Prop 16, it's in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and download the chat as well. And so anything that has links, you will get that in the follow-up. Thank you for having attended here. And you will also get links to information where we can access that and make it easy to just do something with it, right? Because we live in a digital age and we don't all have access, and we should. And part of our struggle is pushing for that as well. So again, thank you so much. And todos buenas noches. Muchísimas gracias from my family here, patient in the background, and all of your families alongside you. I am looking forward to having my daughters watch this with me later and get excited about the familiar faces they've seen when I drag them along for coffees, from the days when they were in strollers to now that, you know, my oldest is 14 and towers over me a bit and chuckles every time. And so thank you all for holding space alongside all of us, and to continue to hold space out in community to push and just speaking truth to power as guerreras in our comunidades. And with that, folks, we'll have a good night. I'm going to end the recording. Muchísimas gracias. We'll linger here for anybody that wants to hang out. But thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.